Before we start the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell button so you can get all the new content from us. So the movie starts in the near future, and we see the President of the United States giving a speech on TV. We learn that the country is in the middle of a civil war, and two states, Texas and California, have managed to secede from the U.S. They've formed the Western Forces, a group that's actively supporting other secessionist movements across the country. The president, however, reassures everyone that things are under control and that the government will win the war soon. Meanwhile, over in bustling New York City, we meet Lee, watching the president's latest speech. But as the words pour out, you can tell by the look on her face she's not buying a single word of it. The next morning, Lee teams up with her fellow journalist and close friend Joe to cover a massive protest brewing in the heart of the city. The protesters are fired up, angry about the government cutting off the state's water supply due to the ongoing war. Its tense emotions are running high, and then, as if on cue, the police arrive. They don't just show up, they storm in with brutal force, turning the peaceful protest into chaos. A young photographer, Jesse, gets beaten up. Lee steps in and pulls Jesse aside to protect her, and just in time a bomb goes off, causing even more chaos. Later that night, we see Lee and Joe sitting in a hotel room, with Lee working on everything she shot earlier, preparing to publish it. Joining them is an experienced and seasoned journalist named Sammy. Sammy asks Lee and Joe what their next plans are, and they tell him they're planning to head to Washington, D.C., to film an interview with the American president. Sammy is shocked and immediately advises them against it. He warns that the president and his forces, whether the military or the police, are killing civilians and journalists without mercy all over the country, even bombing civilians from the air. Imagine what they'd do to you in Washington if you went there, he says. Not to mention, the road from here to Washington is incredibly dangerous and difficult, and anyone could kill them on the way. Sammy suggests that instead of heading to Washington, they should go to the front lines where the separatists are fighting the president's forces and film the battles there. Despite Sammy's advice, Lee and Joe remain adamant about going to the Capitol to film the interview. Sam, despite his age, offers to join them on the journey, and even though Lee hesitates at first, she agrees. After that, Lee heads up to her hotel room to rest, but as soon as she does, the young photographer she saved that morning, who she now learns is named Jesse, comes to her. Jesse thanks Lee repeatedly for everything she did to help her earlier. Lee grows fond of her, and then Jesse leaves. The next day, Lee goes to Joe, who is preparing the car for their trip to the Capitol. Lee notices that not only is Sammy in the car, but also the photographer, Jesse. Lee freaks out and asks Joe what this young girl is doing with them on such a dangerous trip. Joe tells her that Jesse isn't a kid, she's 23, and that she asked to come on this journey herself because she wants to experience an adventure like this, become a journalist, and learn from their expertise. Joe didn't have the heart to say no to her request. Lee finds herself in a situation where she has no choice, so she reluctantly agrees to let Jesse join them on the trip. And so they hit the road, Joe, Lee, Jesse, and Sammy heading towards the Capitol. Along the way, they pass by flocks of sheep everywhere, even crossing a bridge at one point. On that bridge, there are dozens of destroyed cars, the result of airstrikes, which clearly highlights the intensity of the civil war happening in the country. They continue on their way until they reach a gas station. When they stop to refuel, they find that the station is controlled by a group of armed men. Lee and Joe step out to talk to the leader of the group, and Lee offers him an extra $300 on top of the price of the fuel to let them refuel. The leader laughs because at this point the US dollar has become so weak that $300 doesn't mean much anymore. But Lee clarifies to him that she's offering $300 in Canadian dollars. The leader laughs and agrees to the deal. Meanwhile, Jesse has wandered off from the group and is strolling around. Lee notices that one of the armed men is following her, so she quietly follows them to see where they're going. She discovers two people tied up and tortured. At that moment, Lee realizes that the armed man had offered Jesse the chance to come and see these two captives and take pictures of them. Lee asks the man why he did that to the two people, and he tells her that they were thieves, and this is what had to be done to them. After that, the armed man asks Jesse what they should do with the two captives. Should they skin them, kill them, or something else entirely? Jesse is stunned, having never seen anything like this before, and can't even speak. But Lee, having witnessed far worse, tells the armed man to pose with the two tortured captives so she can take pictures for the newspaper. The man laughs and agrees. It's clear that Lee, being a seasoned journalist, has become numb to these situations, focused only on getting the shot for a great story. As they move on, Jesse is still in shock, crying, while Lee tells Jesse that being a photojournalist isn't an easy job, and if she wants to make it, she'll need to toughen up, as she'll see far worse things. Jesse listens quietly, taking in Lee's words. Later on, while driving, they spot a destroyed helicopter. Lee quickly calls Joe and Jesse over, telling Jesse to take pictures because it's a great shot. It's clear Lee is trying to calm Jesse down and build her confidence. That night, they camp out to rest and continue their journey in the morning. However, while they're sitting, they notice a battle happening nearby between the separatists and the president's forces. Missiles are flying back and forth between the two sides, and Joe and Sammy discuss it, realizing they need to go and capture footage of the battle the next day. Everyone agrees on the plan. The following day, they head to the battlefield, where the separatists and the army are exchanging fire. Missiles continue to fly, and one of the separatists gets trapped. As he tries to move, he's shot, which is a huge shock for Jesse. It's the first time she's seen someone killed right in front of her. Despite the shock, she keeps taking pictures, while Lee also carefully captures every detail of the scene. After a while, the soldiers start to run out of ammunition. The separatists, along with Lee and the group, head into the building where the army soldiers were stationed. As they go up, they find an injured soldier, and one of the separatists finishes him off with a shot. The rest of the soldiers are unharmed, but they've run out of ammunition, so the separatists take them as prisoners. They bring them down to the street and coldly execute them. Lee and Jesse capture everything on camera. Lee remains completely unfazed, and Jesse is slowly becoming as desensitized as her. Afterward, they continue on their way and stop at a refugee camp for the night. The next day, they carry on until they reach a strange, eerily quiet area. The shops are open, and everything seems normal, with no sign of war. Joe, Lee, and Jesse enter a clothing store, and Joe starts chatting with the store clerk. He asks her how they're living so peacefully while the country is at war, especially since this area isn't fortified at all, and people seem to be living their lives normally. The clerk explains that they've seen the war and how hard it is, so they simply decided to distance themselves from it and live in peace. They chose not to side with the separatists, the army, or anyone else. Joe laughs and tells her that the army could attack them for no reason, but he also says he's happy to see that they're living happily in this area. They continue on their way until they come across the body of a soldier lying in front of them. Everyone gets scared, realizing that there must be a sniper nearby who shot the soldier. They fear that if they continue, the sniper might target them too. They decide to turn back, but before they can, the sniper starts shooting at them. Joe quickly drives the car to a safe spot, and they all get out. There, Joe and Jesse notice two people lying on the ground, hiding, and trying to shoot back at the sniper from a distance. The sniper, it turns out, is a soldier hiding inside a house in the area. As they keep an eye on the soldier, Joe talks to the two people and asks if they're with the separatists or anyone else. They explain that they aren't with any side, but the soldier came to kill them, so they had no choice but to take him out first. They managed to pinpoint the soldier's location and shoot him from a distance, making the area safe again. The next day, they continue their journey, and this time Lee is driving since Joe is exhausted and needs some rest. While Lee is driving, she notices a car speeding behind them, coming at them recklessly. Lee alerts everyone, but as the car gets closer, they all calm down when they realize it's their journalist friends, Tony and Bohai, in the car. Tony and Bohai had found out from Joe that he was heading to Washington, D.C., so they decided to follow him to see what he was up to, hoping to catch a scoop or any breaking news along the way. At that moment, everyone starts pulling off some wild stunts. Tony jumps from his car to Joe's while they're both still moving, which impresses Jesse. Not wanting to be left out, she also jumps from Joe's car to Tony's and ends up riding with Bohai. Bohai starts joking around with everyone, speeding up the car so fast that no one can catch up with him. After a few minutes, Bohai and Jesse disappear completely from the road. Lee and the group turn around to look for them. After some searching, they find Tony and Bohai's car parked on the side of the road, wide open with no one inside. Everyone gets out of the car and starts searching for them. Eventually, they spot them in the distance, standing with two army officers. It turns out the officers are unstable, and at that moment, they were in the process of burying dozens of bodies in a mass grave. The group calls out to Jesse and Bohai, and they decide to approach the officers. Bohai tries to suggest they leave, but no one listens to him. Lee, Tony, and Joe head over to talk to the soldiers. They try talking to the soldiers to convince them to let Jesse and Bohai go, but the problem is that the leader of the soldiers is completely insane. Without warning, he accuses Bohai and then Tony of being Chinese American, not real Americans. Panic spreads among the group, as the crazed leader seems ready to kill Jesse, Lee, and Joe next. But something unexpected happens. Sam suddenly appears, driving fast and hitting the commander, knocking him far away. Immediately, Joe, Lee, and Jesse jump into the car with Sam, and they speed away from the scene. As they drive off, one of the soldiers still alive starts shooting at them from a distance. Unfortunately, during the gunfire, Sam is hit. Joe drives as fast as he can, racing to a camp run by Western forces in hopes of getting Sam treated. These Western forces, as we mentioned before, are the leaders of the resistance against the president and the army. Unfortunately, they don't even try to help Sam and he dies. Naturally, everyone is devastated, crying over the loss. After a while, Joe and Lee sit down with two fellow journalists and talk. They learn from the journalists that many of the army leaders have already surrendered, and only a small group remains protecting the president in the White House in Washington. The Western forces are planning to launch an attack on Washington today to take down the president once and for all, and his remaining followers are being targeted because they are corrupt and have done everything wrong. At this moment, Joe loses it, realizing that they won't be able to film an interview with the president before he's killed, meaning that all of Sam, Tony, and Bohai's deaths, as well as everything they've witnessed, will have been for nothing. With no other option, Joe, Lee, and Jesse decide to join the Western forces in Washington and capture the final battle. Not long after, the Western forces move toward Washington, with the journalists, including Lee, Joe, and Jesse, accompanying them. When they arrive, a fierce battle breaks out between the Western forces and the president's remaining troops. Despite the intensity of the fight, Jesse continues to film the battle, even though it's incredibly tough and bullets are flying everywhere, and anyone could get hit at any moment. The Western forces manage to storm the White House, entering to capture the president. Of course, Lee, Jesse, and Joe go in with them to film everything. Inside, there are still troops protecting the president, and a firefight breaks out between them and the Western forces, turning the White House into a full-on battlefield. In the chaos, Jesse makes a wrong move while trying to get a perfect shot and almost gets hit by a bullet. Lee quickly pushes her out of the way, taking her place, and unfortunately, she falls dead, shocking everyone. Despite the tragedy, the Western forces continue their battle against the president's troops until they finally eliminate them all. They eventually reach the president himself, who was literally hiding under his desk. At that moment, before the Western forces execute him, Joe steps forward and asks the president if he has any last words. The president begs Joe to have mercy and stop the forces from killing him. Joe tells him that isn't going to happen, and the Western forces shoot the president, killing him instantly. Jesse captures the first shot of the president's death, as well as footage of the Western soldiers standing around his body. With this final shot, the film ends. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to smash that like button and hit subscribe. You won't want to miss any upcoming breakdowns. And hey, what movie or series should I cover next? Drop your suggestions in the comments below.